Hi, and thanks for tuning in. My name's Pete. Cedar's away this week. Today I thought we'd do a brood inspection on this hive. It's looking pretty full of bees. We look at this rear window here. You can see it's absolutely chockers of bees. And hasn't been inspected for a little while, so we'll have a look and see what's going on and try and give you guys some tips on doing brood inspections, what to look for, how to find your queen, and if you've got any questions, please type them into the comments below and do my best to answer them. So I'll just take the roof off. We've got a bit of a blowy and blustery day here, and we're hoping that it doesn't rain, because you don't really want to open your hives when it's raining. Bees don't like it very much. I'll just put my hood on so I can reach it. And with the flow hives, this is a 7-frame flow hive, so it's the larger size. And so I expect this super will be pretty heavy. The bees always jam the two boxes together. So you get your hive tool, stick it in the corner, and if you stick your hive tool down that way, you'll get a lot of leverage on both boxes. So if you can get your hive tool in the corner and you stick it down like that, then you can pull up and lever the boxes apart. And if you do that while you lift, you generally should be able to get them apart. It doesn't matter if the queen excluder sticks to the brood box or the super, because you can just get it later. Looks like it's going to stick to the super. So I just like to put my supers on their ends. You can lie them down flat or put them on top of the inner cover. And there goes the inner cover. It's always a good idea to look for the queen on the queen excluder here, just to make sure she's not there. You can see a lot of drones on there, and we don't want to put those guys up into the super. So what we'll do is shake the queen excluder off into the brood box. Just a quick sharp shake. Wait till the wind dies down. These guys hopefully won't go everywhere, but they'll figure it out. So already I can see, without smoking these guys, that the population's quite high. You can see down in between the frames, lots and lots of bees. So it's a really good sign. You can also see, I forgot to say this at the beginning, but it's also a great idea before you open up your hives to have a look at the entrance and see what activity is happening at the entrance. If you've got low activity, it may be a sign that your hive isn't healthy and doesn't have much going on. So just give this guys a little bit of smoke, and that'll just drive them down. So generally the bees will stick the outside frames to the walls. So you may want to go 2nd frame in, and just take your J hook on your hive tool and put it underneath the frame you want to pull out, and then lever back on the other frame. Looks like that frame might come apart. So you can take the kick down part of your J tool and just break that propolis. You can see the propolis in here. The bees just stick everything together. So I'm just breaking that apart so it's not so sticky. And do it for the other side. And it should hopefully come out now. There we go. I'm just pulling it out really slowly. So what we're looking for is, we want to find eggs, young larvae, lots and lots of bees You want to sort of see how much in the way of stores they've got, like honey and pollen. You want to see how many drones they've got. And in this case, this is an all drone comb frame. What you can see is that drone cells are much bigger than worker brood cells. So there's actually 3 different types of cells in the comb of the beehive. The biggest ones are drone cells. You see they've got this like convex capping, and that's so that the big drones can actually grow and fit inside there. There's a few drones just about to emerge. This one is chewing its way out. So is this one here. And the worker size cells are the smaller cells. And the honey cells actually are usually up the top of the frame, and they generally have a kind of an angle to them, up towards the top bar of the frame, so that the honey doesn't fall out. Now the bees will fill any size cell with honey if they need to, but the queen will only lay drones in these larger size cells and workers in the smaller size cells. So you can see this whole frame is all drones, which is a really great sign, because as far as humans know, drones are quite resource heavy in the beehive, and as far as we know, they don't do anything apart from fly out to find a queen to mate with. So if you can tell if your hive is producing a lot of drones, then they're doing really well. They're obviously healthy, because what happens when they get weaker is that the workers that are guarding the entrance to the hive will actually not let the drones back in, so the drones will fly out, and then the workers won't let them back in. They'll kick them out of the hive so that they can save their resources. So I'll just put this aside, and we'll find out what's on this side frame. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. So here's a great example of the worker size cells that I was talking about. And you can see, actually, I'm just touching the bees to move them, to get them out of the way, and touch them very lightly. You can see the difference. So here's some worker size cells in here, and then you've got your drone size cells in here, these larger cells. You've got worker brood down in here. And hopefully the camera can pick up the pollen that's getting stored in here. So the pollen actually comes in the form of little balls on the bees' legs. So they have 3 million hairs all over their body, and when they walk across the flowers, the pollen actually gets attracted to the hairs and attached to the hairs. And then the bees will wipe that pollen off and stick it into balls and store it on their legs as they fly around. And then they bring it back to the hive and scrape it off their legs into the cells. And then other bees will come and pack that pollen into the cell with their heads, and they'll put a little bit of honey and their own saliva containing special enzymes that ferment that pollen so it's more digestible. And then they feed that to the young larvae. I'm just blowing on these bees to get them out of the way so I can see into the comb. And I'm just looking for eggs here. I don't expect to find any, because this is an outside frame and the queen is not, generally the queen's not going to lay on an outside frame, but the bees never obey the rules, of course. But I can't see anything in here at the moment. There's still lots of drones. The drones usually hang on the outsides of the hive. So you can put this back in. Just usually you want to remember the order of your frames as well. So now this is the first one. The one I put aside is the second one. Now all the bees have come up, and you can see them over the top of the top bars of the frames. So that's totally fine, but we kind of want them out of our way. So just a little bit of smoke, just where we want to work, and I'll just drive them down. So when you're looking for eggs, they can be quite tricky to find if you're just starting out. And especially in darker comb, sometimes they're quite hard. But if you look for your shadow on the ground, that'll mean the sun's coming over your shoulder. Instead of looking directly for the sun and looking into it and ruining your eyes, you can look for your shadow and then turn towards your shadow. And if you just manipulate the frame until the sun shines right down the cells, you should see a tiny little egg. It looks like a tiny grain of rice. It's about the size of a shaft of a pin. It's really, really small. And sometimes you can't see them until the light actually gets on them, and all of a sudden they pop out and you see them. It's a lot easier to see the older larvae, which are these white little C shapes down in here. I'm not sure if the camera's picking that up, but when the sun gets in, they're a lot easier to see. And generally when you see eggs and young larvae, that's how to tell if your hive is queen right, meaning that they have a viable laying queen. And that's very important for the health of your colony. In fact, it's one of the most important things. So all up in here I can see a really good pattern of young larvae. You see the white, little white grubs, and it's and a little bit of liquid, and that is called royal jelly, and that's what those grubs are fed for the first 3 days of their life. And then the workers switch them over to the fermented pollen mixed with enzymes, and we call that bee bread. If you've got any questions specifically about brood inspections too, please put them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Is there any questions, Trace?
Yeah, Pete, they're coming in. It's just so cute. I was watching all these bees that you'd put on this inner cover down here, and they're all slowly just having a little march into the super box.
Oh yeah.
It was like they're on their own little mission down there,
That's
going
great.
back into their super box. Cute as. Actually, one of the questions, Pete, and it was a question that came in on the phones, and I said that I would ask it, and it's about your brood frames actually. And a woman called in and she was asking, and I hadn't heard of this question before. She was wondering if you buy the wax foundation, and she has a flow hive and knows that we don't use it, or prefer not to. She was wondering if you're using that wax foundation, if it's contaminated, or where do they get that wax from so that it doesn't then contaminate your hive? And is that a problem? And also she said some of the wax foundation she'd found was coming in from China, and she was wondering about that as well. And I said I'd ask you today on Facebook Live.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I guess you threw me in the deep end there.
I did, yeah. Was it a good one? I don't often do that.
Australia, for a while now, has been the only place that you can get guaranteed clean wax from because of the fact that there hasn't been varroa mite in the country, and so beekeepers haven't had to chemically treat their hives for varroa. Now whether beekeepers are using chemicals for other things, that is another story, but generally your backyard beekeeper isn't putting any chemicals in their hives. Wax does store whatever's brought in by the bees. It actually gets in the wax and is stored. So yeah, if I would imagine, I don't actually know 100%, but I would imagine that getting wax from other countries, especially countries with varroa, your wax could be contaminated with chemicals. Having said that, I don't know how much that affects the bees, because I imagine that because those wax sheets are quite thin, it would be a small amount of chemicals that are in the wax, and also the bees draw off that wax with their own clean new wax, so that you get a sheet of foundation and the bees will draw that out and coat it with their new wax. So I'm not sure if it's really a huge issue. It may be, but you know, I guess to avoid that, you could just use your empty blank frames with a starter strip and let the bees just draw their own clean wax. It doesn't take any longer or shorter, seemingly, to me. to do that, whether you start them on foundation or on starter strips. So it can be a way to avoid that and make sure you've got that nice, clean, fresh wax. Having said that too, you can, once your wax comb gets a little old, you can see this comb, it's getting a little dark. It's not too old yet, but it is getting quite dark, and it gets sort of hard. You can cycle these frames out when they get older by putting them out to the side, and the bees then generally in a flow they'll fill it with honey, and then you can remove that and eat the honey, extract the honey from the wax by squeezing it or cold pressing it, and then you know, do whatever you want with that wax, and then put your blank frame back in, and you get that nice turnover of wax.
And is that something, Pete, that you should do on a regular basis?
Yeah, but not too regular. You can get quite a long time out of your combs. If you see your combs getting really black and a bit gross, then maybe you want to start thinking about cycling them out. Usually you can get, you know, at least 5 or 6, 10 years out of comb. Some beekeepers never ever cycle their frames out. But it can really help if you've got a hive that is, say it's got Chalkbrood or Chalkbrood or some other sickness that could be in the wax. Those are fungal problems that produce spores, so those spores can be in the wax. That can be a good way to get rid of that.
Nice, thanks Pete, I didn't mean to throw you in the deep end. I said I'd ask, and the other thing was that someone had mentioned maybe also because the wax is heated, and maybe that also kills off any pathogens or anything that are perhaps in that.
That's a great point too.
Wax as well.
That's a great point. I'm not sure if that will help the chemicals out of that, but like I said, I don't really know. So lots more capped brood in this frame. This is the next frame in. And we've got some pollen stores over here. And on the other side. One thing I should say too, actually, is because this wax is quite old and it's all very strong, it's nicely attached to the frame. If you're just starting out and you've got your blank frames and you've got a new comb being drawn, you don't want to do this and hold your frame like a dinner plate, because the wax will drop out. And you've only got to do that once to know that it is a really bad idea. So it's great to hold your frames in plane with gravity. Whoops, I'm squashing bees. In plane with gravity, and then to turn it around, if you've done looking at this side, you lift your hand up to the sky like that, and then just flip it around like a door, and then you can put it upside down if you want to. And as long as you're not doing these ones, then you're pretty safe. Here's an interesting thing too, actually. It's an old queen cell. It's quite old because it's really dark, and you can see the chew marks around the bottom. That's where a queen's emerged at one point. It's probably when this last spring, probably when they swarmed and they've requeened. And here's what we call a queen cup. And that's like a little insurance policy for the bees. If the queen starts failing, they'll actually herd her around and chase her around and try and get her to lay in that and lay an egg, and then the bees can make a new queen. So because the queens are quite big, they need a big size cell to house that queen, and that's how they'll start it. If they need to make a queen in an emergency, say the queen dies, the beekeeper squashes her, or she goes down for whatever reason, they'll actually find a tiny little grub in one of these worker-sized cells, and they'll chew the cell wall down and then make one of these larger queen cells sort of out and off the comb. And the only difference between a normal worker bee and a queen bee is, as far as we know, is what the workers feed that young larvae. And so I mentioned before that the young larvae are fed on royal jelly for 3 days and then they're switched to bee bread. But the queen larvae is just a normal worker larvae, but because it's fed on royal jelly the whole time it's a larvae, it's royal jelly is really hormone rich, and it enables that young larvae, when it pupates, it enables the ovaries to develop. So you can kind of think of all of these workers as stunted queens because their ovaries haven't developed when they've been pupating. So it's pretty interesting.
That is so incredible, isn't it, Pete? Mate, what if we were all fed royal jelly? I think we could
Yeah.
become queens.
All of us, all
All
queens.
of us, all queens. Hey, but on that question, this is a good one because Tara's just asked in about queen cells and just wondering, how do you know if a queen cell has something in it without breaking it? Because they recently had a queenless hive but now have a queen and the queen started laying. So just wanting to know what to do with the queen cells that were built in case there's queens in those cells.
Great question. If those queen cells are capped, then there's definitely going to be a queen pupating inside. If they're not capped, you can actually look up inside them and see if there's a grub in them. I'll see if I can get this one up in the camera again. So this is an old one and it doesn't look anything like a new queen cell, but if you manipulate the frame and you look down into the cell and you should be able to see either an egg or a larva in there. And that's what I do with the queen cups as well, because you don't know sometimes. Sometimes these cups are really, really big and they look like actually it could be a queen cell. So I always kind of have a look in them. You may have to jiggle the frame around to see if you can get your eyes in the gap. But if those queen cells are actually capped, they'll look like I guess they look like a peanut in its shell. And it's sort of got a round end like that, then there'll definitely be a pupating queen in them. And if you've already got a queen that's accepted in your hive, that you want that genetics in your hive, then you should destroy those queen cells before they emerge, because those virgins, well, a lot of stuff happens, but one of those virgins will take over that hive and that hive will contain her genetics.
Great. So Tiz is asking, who joins us pretty much regularly, what does it mean if there are not a lot of drones, saying that their hive only has a handful of drones?
That's also pretty normal. I know I mentioned before that a lot of drones can be a really great sign of a healthy colony, but it is also really normal to not have a lot of drones. You just still want to have a look at your worker population and make sure you've got plenty of workers. Like I said, the workers can kick the drones out when times aren't so bumper, not necessarily when times are tough, but when there's like not kind of heaps of food about. So I would have expected at the moment for the bees to be starting to kick the drones out, but I'm surprised to see that they're not, because there's seems to be not that much honey around for them, or not that much nectar around for the bees, I should say. So yeah, if you don't have a lot of drones, it's not necessarily a sign that you've got an unhealthy colony. You want to make sure that all your brood capping looks right. So you're looking for these nicely capped brood cells. Because generally, if you don't have a healthy hive, you're going to see ruptures and pinholes and things going on in that capping. So that's generally the main sign that we're looking for. But yeah, if there's not many drones, don't worry too much. I think you'll probably find when the flows starts, when springtime starts as well, you'll see a real bump up in drone numbers. So I'm still looking for the queen. Might have missed her. I like to make the bees move to try and find the queen. That's why I'm touching them all the time and blowing on them. You want to make sure you're wearing your mesh when you blow on the bees, because sometimes they can shoot out and get you in the face. Don't ask me how I know. I like to make the bees move because I kind of look for the difference in movement that the queen has. She's got fat legs and a long bum, and she sort of stalks around, so she's easier to see, for me at least, if she's moving.
Trying to spot her.
Lots of pollen in this frame. It's a really great sign when you've got lots of pollen everywhere. It's because pollen is essential for brood rearing, so if you've got a lot of pollen, then you know that your brood will probably be healthy. Here's another interesting thing. This is a queen cell that's been chewed out from the side. That's up the top of the frame. That's the top there. And what happens is when the bees make queens, for whatever reason, there's a few different reasons they'll make queens, but they'll make quite a few. And then the first queen out, the first virgin queen emerged from one of the cells, will come around and locate the others in their cells and sting them through the side. And they actually do that by what's called piping and tooting. And the first queen out will make a piping sound. It's this kind of keening little sound, and then the queens that are still in the cells will answer with a little tooting sound. And it's kind of a funny thing, because when they answer, it means that the queen that's searching for them can locate them and sting them to death. So it's a bit brutal. If you've got any questions, please type them in the comments below.
Yes, Stu. Stu. No, Pete. It's not Stu.
Not
What
Stu.
am I saying? Question coming in. Can you use a magic marker to put a date and a frame number on the top of the frames?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea. It lets you know how old your frames are and how old your wax is, obviously. And then if you're switching frames between hives in your yard, then you might be able to keep track of things better. If there are signs of disease, you'll be able to trace that back to the hive that you moved that frame from. So yeah, that's a really great idea.
Great. Gail's asking, Pete, recently got a split and have inspected the numbers, but the numbers seem really low. And just wondering, is there anything they can do? They're a new beekeeper and wondering, will it die off? Because they couldn't find a queen, but being a newbie, maybe they've missed the queen. Should they just leave it, or? Not sure how long they've inspected it. So they got a split, they've inspected it, the numbers seem really low, and just wondering, will it die off if they didn't see a queen, or will they start to rear a queen?
If they've got eggs, they'll start to rear a queen if there's no queen in there. If you can't find your queen, then you need to be able to spot eggs or what I call grubs or young larvae. And as long as you see those, you're generally pretty right that there's a queen in there. So you may want to go in again and have a really good look and see if you can see any eggs, or even, so this is quite old larvae in here, just about to be capped. It's in amongst the capped brood. So you can see it's fairly easy to see. It's those big white chunky grubs in the cell. Hopefully the camera can pick it up. So as long as you see those, you want to see a decent patch if you can't find your queen. The thing is, when you've got low numbers of bees, there is sort of a critical point where they can't get going because they don't have enough bees to forage for food and look after the brood. So the queen will sort of tailor how much she lays, or maybe the workers will sort of make her tailor how much she lays to the population of bees. So if you've got a low population, it can, and you do have a laying queen, it can be a little while before you see them expand. You may want to try feeding them sugar water as well if they're very low on numbers. That can really help the queen kick into gear and start laying. If you feed them a 1-to-1 sugar, so that's 1 kilo of sugar to 1 litre of water, then that will stimulate brood rearing in the hive, and you want to keep that up to them as long as you can. There's lots of videos on feeding on our YouTube channel, is that right, Trace?
Yeah, there are, and on our website I think there's a
Website?
lot of information as well about that.
Excellent. I know Cedar's made quite a few great videos on feeding,
Yep.
and that can really help. But yes, if there's no brood and you can't find a queen, then what you'll need to do is buy a queen from a queen breeder and then put her in. She'll come in a little cage and you just slip her in between the frame bars. Just slip her in like that and then close the hive up and wait for a week and then go back in and make sure that the bees have accepted her. And there's usually a 75 to 80% chance that they will, especially if they're queenless. But that could be the only way to save your colony. I guess the other way is if you have another hive, you can give it a frame of bees and a frame of eggs from another colony. And then those weak bees will make a queen from those eggs.
Such a calm hive, this one,
Isn't it? It's beautiful.
I'm wondering if it's the paint job that Laura did. They think they're at night time in the stars and galaxy or something.
So this is a great frame of brood. So we can tell by this frame, I guess, that the bees population in this hive is really going to kick into gear, because once these all emerge, that's a lot of bees. And it'll be the same like that on the other side. So given the time of year, we may have to watch out for this hive swarming because the population is really high. Now if the population's just like this in the brood box and not in the super, then there'd be no worry about that. But because the super's so jammed as well, I just may have to watch out for it. And what I would do to avoid that is go in regularly and search for queen cells. And so if I find queen cells, I know, okay, this is going to swarm, and I'll split it straight away. I just saw, there we go, I just saw a baby bee. So this one, it's really fluffy. It's just chewed its way out of the cell. And they're a little bit wobbly. They're very cute. So still haven't found the queen yet. Sometimes you can chase her across the box. She'll move from frame to frame to get out of the light. As you remove a frame, she'll then go around to the next one. But, you know, sometimes you just miss her. But generally, this is a great frame to give you an idea of the health of the hive. If you see a frame like this in your hive with no anomalies in the capping, then you know you've got a really healthy hive. This looks really good.
Nice. Pete, Tim's asking, he's in the Blue Mountains and just noticed the hive, their hive has a large number of swarm cells on the bottom of the frames and a couple of queen cups in the middle. Just wondering, should they remove these given that now we're going through spring and into summer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think once the bees, yeah, that can really help. Yeah, that can definitely slow that down if you remove all the queen cells. You will want to keep going in and doing that if you decide to do that, because once the bees kind of swarming behaviour has kicked in, it can be quite hard to stop, and they will continue just to make queen cells and try and swarm. So it can work for good, but usually it can just be a way to slow that process down. So generally what I would do is reduce the population by, yeah, definitely destroy the queen cells and then add another box. Just got a plane going over. Add another box, so you've doubled their space. If you can get, it's up to you whether you add another super or another brood box, but generally another brood box is the best thing to do to prevent the swarming. Or you can split the hive. So in that case, I would leave the queen cells and make sure that all the queen cells go into the split, or vice versa, the laying queen goes into the split and all the queen cells stay behind. Just depends what you want to do there. So if you want another hive, then split. But if you want to avoid the whole swarming and avoid having another hive, then I recommend destroying the queen cells and adding another box. And hope for the best, because you can never really quite control them.
Nice. Pete, I'll just throw this in. We've got someone, Pest Hunter Outdoors, recently has bought a brood box and wondering how to purchase a flow hive in the US. Just check out our website, honeyflow.com, and they are within the US, so they ship within the USA. So honeyflow.com for all our US customers. And Shane's asking, Pete, do you know, is it true that bees can't see red?
I believe that's true, yeah, I believe it is. And when you mark a queen with a red texture, she generally stays marked, but when you mark a queen with a blue texture, the bees will actually chew it off. So I think they can see blue and purple a lot better than they can see red. I believe it's true they can't see red. So I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah.
I believe they can see ultraviolet too, I think. Apparently they've got 5 eyes in the top of their head, as well as the 2 big eyes. It's either 5 or 6 eyes in the top of their head, and they are to triangulate with the sun. So if that's the case, it's pretty incredible. Very crowded frame here, so I'm not sure about finding the queen, but if we don't find her, we know that she's there because we've seen all that brood. So you can see, I guess, this comb is getting fairly dark and fairly old. What happens, you can sort of see this is a larger size cell, so this is drone size cells here. And what happens is when the adult bee emerges, they're pupating in a cocoon inside that cell. And so they'll actually, when they chew their way out of the cell, they leave their cocoon behind. And then all those cocoons build up and sort of get stuck in the cells, and that becomes the wax, and that's why these cells, the walls get thicker and thicker. Walls of the cells get thicker and thicker as the comb ages.
Nice. We've got a bit of cloud coming in over here. I hope it's not going to bring a little bit of rain with it.
Just felt some rain just then.
Yeah, just a few drips happening here. Such strange weather.
Really not a great idea to open your hive up in the wet weather. The bees really don't like it, and they get wet. You're basically pulling their roof off in the rain. It's not very nice. But you can also get stung because they get fairly wound up. A rain droplet is a pretty large thing to hit a bee.
Yeah. Sue's got a couple of questions. So one of your questions is, my end frame this morning was just all honey. Is that okay? I'm not quite sure what, Pete, you might know that, or whether we need a bit more info on that one, which...
Maybe you're referring to the very last frame on the sides of the box.
Yeah.
So that is perfectly normal. The brood nest will generally be in the middle of the hive, and then the bees will put sort of drones and honey out towards the edges, and I believe that that's because they need to defend the honey. That's their special resource, and they need to be able to defend it, so they stick it out towards the edge, and they have the brood in the middle so that they get easy access to heating and cooling through the entrance. I believe that's the case. So yeah, if you've got a frame of honey on the outside, that's completely normal. And I was talking about cycling combs out before. That's one of the ways to cycle your combs out. So if you've got an old comb, just put it out towards the edge, and in a honey flow, the bees will actually just fill that with honey, and you can remove it and eat it. And then put your empty frame back in to replace it, and the bees will draw more wax. So here we've got another drone comb. So if you've just tuned in, the very first frame we pulled out, which was actually the second frame in, goes in this gap here, was a drone comb, and that's very normal for the bees to put the drones out near the edge of the hive. And you can see again all this convex capping, looks like a bit of a moonscape. You can also see these cells are just getting capped, and here's a cell with a little hole in it, so it's usually worth having a look. So you just take the corner of your hive tool, if you've got capping with a hole in it, and just push it aside really gently, and I can see it's a nice white larvae beneath. The bees just haven't quite capped it off properly. If you see nice kind of shiny white larvae, you're generally good. But if you see discoloured or chalky or anything kind of a bit weird, then you may want to take a closer look at that and do some research as to what you're finding. And if that's the case, you generally won't just find one cell like that, you'll find quite a few. So we may have to close the hive up fairly soon. I can see the weather coming in.
Yeah. Pete, Sue's other question was, just notice how you like to put your super like that on the side. She was just wondering, does it affect the honey in the cells?
I haven't found it to be the case, but it may be. Generally what happens is any honey that falls out, the bees will clean it up and move it back to where it came from or back to somewhere else. They don't like open honey in their hives, so anything that's dribbling around, they'll just lick it up and sort it all out. So I generally don't worry about it too much. Lots and lots of commercial beekeepers I've watched do that, and so I just started copying it, and to me it's a little bit easier because it means that if you're putting your super down flat on the ground, you've got to put it on something, and generally that's the inner cover. And then, you know, when I do that and I want to put my super back on, the inner cover always just sticks to the bottom and I don't have enough hands to pull it off. So I just like putting it on its end because it just saves that from happening, saves the bees getting kind of caught in the grass and stuff. The only thing is that you do have to smoke them back in so they all build up there. So before you put them on, before you put the super back on the hive, you just have to smoke them back up into the super. So we might close this hive up. I can just feel the rain starting to come. I'll just have a look on this very last frame, see if we can see the queen or not. But we've probably missed her. Sometimes she can be on the side of the box too. So when you pull your last frame out, just have a look down the side. It's quite tricky to spot, but sometimes you can spot her. Lots of drones. This is very old comb. This is a good example of very old comb. Sometimes when you have a comb on the side of the box, the bees will just not use those cells anymore and they'll sort of block them up in a weird way. So those cells are unusable. And they'll generally just do that for the side frames. I don't know why they do it. But probably this frame needs to be cycled out. So once it's full of honey, then we'll take it out and replace it. There she is there. So you can see a really long, pointy abdomen. And she's got fat legs. Like I said before, she sort of stalks around. She's a little bit quicker than the other bees. And you can also look for a trail of no bees where they get out of her way. You can see them feeding her and grooming her. So she's got a little retinue of workers that do that the whole time. And those workers actually then switch with other workers, and that's how the queen's pheromones get distributed throughout the hive. And it's one of the ways that the hive knows that it has a viable laying queen. And if those pheromones get weaker and weaker, then the bees will actually replace that queen because she's not doing well. That's good. Good that we found her.
Pete.
So I might close this hive back up. If you've got the queen on that frame, you want to be really, really careful when you're putting it back in that you don't squash her.
Pete, is it normal to have two queens in the same brood frame?
It's generally not normal. There are cases where that can happen, but it's generally just a thing where there's one queen in the hive. So there's a sort of a bunch of complicated scenarios where there's 2 queens or more than 1 queen. But generally you've only got 1 viable laying queen in your hive.
Right.
Really
And will a
careful.
queen stop laying before swarming?
Yeah, that's apparently what happens before swarming, is the bees will chase the queen around so that she can't lay, so that she slims down and loses weight for flying. Because when she's new, the queen will fly out to mate once or twice, and she mates with several drones. They say up to 30 drones apparently. And then she comes back to the hive and just lays eggs for the rest of her life and doesn't leave. But when the hive decides to swarm, that laying queen will leave with the swarm. So yeah, the bees will chase her around and slim her down and you know, make her lose weight so that she can fly. And then the new queens that are made, one of those will take over the hive.
And how many eggs, Pete, will she lay in her lifetime?
In her lifetime, I don't know, but apparently when the season's good and the population is spiking for a flow, she can lay 2,000 eggs a day. So I don't know how much that is during her lifetime, but it's a lot.
That is a lot.
So smoke these guys back down. Looks like they're all running out. That's okay. I just want to put the inner cover on.
And here comes the sun again.
And so here's a small hive beetle, just on the inner cover. And these guys aren't a problem generally if there's a couple, 10. But if your hive gets weak, then the bees can't police the space, and then they can really become a problem. I just see a drone on the underside of the inner cover here, so I'll just get him and put him back down so that he doesn't end up in the super, because he won't get out. He doesn't get through the queen excluder. The drones have no stingers, so it's really great to be able to practice picking bees up. Just practice on drones. And that can be really handy if you want to mark your queen or move bees.
Pete, do you know what yellow jackets are?
Yeah, they're wasps that are in the States.
Ah, yeah, because Thomas is asking that he had to vacate, the yellow jacket basically got inside and killed the bees and ate all the honey. And just wondering, do you know of any way of stopping these from getting into the hive?
Sorry, that's a question I can't answer, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I don't have any experience with yellow jackets other than what I've seen on YouTube. And I just see that they're really, really aggressive and their stings really hurt. So, yeah, sorry, I can't answer that.
Might be a good one for our US
Yeah.
beekeepers who are here to help Thomas out there.
Yeah, if you've got the answer, please type it into the comments. So all these bees that are just kind of wandering around on the outside, they'll go into the hive. These guys will climb up the legs and find their way back. Especially if it's about to rain, they'll get inside. So don't worry about them too much. So we know that this hive is really, really healthy. It's great. We've seen the laying queen. We've seen lots of drones, lots of stores, lots of pollen, and the brood capping is all looking really, really good. So this hive is doing really, really well. And are there any other questions, Trace?
Yeah, there's a few, and it's great. Someone's answered about that yellow jacket.
What's the answer?
On YouTube, saying that you can actually buy yellow jacket traps at many of the big home improvement stores or online.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so sounds like you need to go and get one of these traps. Yellow jackets, jacket trap. Shane's asking, has a weak colony that seems to lose a high proportion of larvae to chalkbrood. Is it possible to reduce this?
Yeah, that can be a little tricky. The things you can try are moving your hive into a direct sun, where it gets direct sun all day long. If you've got mostly shade or even partial shade, you can move your hive 1 metre a day. You don't have to block the bees up or anything, just move them anytime. The bees will come back and figure that out. Just do it every day and move them into the sun. And that sun and warmth can really help get that chalkbrood under control. The other thing you can try is a little bit of ventilation. So what you can do with a flow hive is just try and find a stick. Just get a stick. This is not a stick, but it'll do for now. And either at the front or at the back, just prop up your inner cover with a stick. Just a little matchstick or something, maybe a little wider than that. And then it can really help with ventilation. And that through ventilation can really sort of help dry out the hive. Because chalkbrood is a fungal infection, and it produces spores. But like I was saying too, if it's kind of taken a hold, it can be in your wax. The spores can be in your wax, so cycling your frames out can really help with that. One way that you can try and do it is using a queen excluder and a second brood box. So make sure you've got, so you shake all the bees down into your brood box so that the queen, you know she's down there. And then you put the brood combs up in your second brood box above the queen excluder. All that brood will then hatch out, and all the nurse bees will go out and help that larvae, and all the brood will eventually hatch out, and then the bees will start storing honey in those combs. And then you can cycle those frames out. It's just another way of cycling frames out and getting fresh wax into your hive. And the other thing you can do is just try requeening, because some queens have genetics that seem to be resistant to things like chalkbrood. So that's usually a fairly good way of getting on top of it. So if you cycle your wax out and requeen, then you might find that you can get rid of it. But definitely try moving into the sun first and giving them some ventilation and see if that helps. The other thing with more ventilation, you just want to make sure that it's not too cold for them. But if you want to take your tray out, if you just take your tray out and leave it out for a while, then there's a mesh up here, and the bees will get lots and lots of ventilation without that tray sort of blocking it a little bit. Having said that, let me just get these bees out. With this little cover here, that contacts the tray when it's in. Oops. Like that. And if you've got these holes facing up, then you're getting ventilation. But if you've got them facing down, then you've blocked that off.
Oh my God, now we're about to have a shower.
Yeah.
Pete, good timing.
So I guess we better wrap it up.
I think we better wrap it up.
Wet. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next time.